There is a discussion in the Rishonim, and it goes back to the Gemara regarding the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, regarding the mitzvah of living in the land of Israel. The Gemara in Ksuvis, at the end of Ksuvis, talks about the great milas of living in Eretz Yisrael, and there's a discussion whether Bizman Hatanam, Bizman Hazeh, whether there's a mitzvah of living in Eretz Yisrael. In fact, it goes back all the way to Avram Avinu, by Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha, go leave your homeland and move to Eretz Yisrael. So was that just a Horasha? Was that just a special halacha for Avram? Or is that halacha for all the Jews of all generations? So the Mishnah in Ksuvis at least tells us that there's a mitzvah. It wasn't a Horasha. It's a mitzvah l'dora. It's the one that's an obligation to live in Eretz Yisrael. There's a further discussion, Bizman Hazeh and Bizman Harishonim, the Machokas, the Ramban, and the Bali Tosfos. The Ramban writes, even Bizman Hazeh, there's a mitzvah min HaTorah, or mitzvah chiyuvis, to live in Eretz Yisrael. The Bali Tosfos point out, Bizman Hazeh, in our time, due to the danger, sakanas drachim, due to travel, or the difficulty in keeping the mitzvahs hatuyas ba'aretz, so there's no longer a mitzvah Bizman Hazeh. So that's a further discussion. That's Bizman of the Bali Tosfos. The Avnei Nezer points out that Bizman Hazeh, obviously those reasons don't apply. We have airplanes, we have easy access, easy travel to Eretz Yisrael, and today we have chief rabbis, we have people taking off Truma Meiser, and it's not as difficult, so therefore some question whether the opinion of Tosfos still applies today. And there's a famous tshuva from Rav Moshe in the early 1950s that he seems to take a middle approach, that there's no mitzvah chiyuvis, there's no obligation, absolute obligation to move to Eretz Yisrael. His raya from a Rambam who writes that mitzvah mutta lishkon b'chol haaretz, lishkon b'chol ha'olam chutz mitzrayim, that you're allowed to live anywhere except for Egypt. If there was a absolute obligation to live in Eretz Yisrael, so it would be us to live everywhere. So based on Rambam, other sources, Rav Moshe concludes what he calls it a mitzvah kiyumis. There's no obligation to move, but if you go, you get a mitzvah. Like we find by the Netziv, others write by matzah during Pesach. The Erev tochul matzah, it's a chiyuv on the first night to eat, so how much you have to eat. So the Achronim talk about eating more, so each kazayis you eat extra, it's also a kiyum in our Torah. So they discuss the concept of a mitzvah chiyuvis and a mitzvah kiyumis. So they point out that the Rav Moshe holds that there's a mitzvah kiyumis today. It's interesting to know Rav Moshe did make a distinction between post-1948 and pre-1948. The fact that we have the Medina under Jewish control didn't seem to be, not that it's not a good thing, but it doesn't seem to be a factor according to Rav Moshe in whether there's a chiyuv or not. The Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, others take a more nationalistic approach, and now Bizman Hazeh that we have Eretz Yisrael under Jewish control, so perhaps maybe there's a bigger chiyuv today. But that's a discussion back during the time of the Rishonim, and it continues to our day. But the Ramban is clear. He learns that the din by Avram Avinu, and everyone agrees, Avram Avinu wasn't just a Horasha, it was a din l'doros. And in theory, according to the Bali Tosfos, you'd be chayav also, but they said for external factors, you don't have to go. So everyone agrees that the ideal place for a Jew is in Eretz Yisrael. And just like every Jew will feel lacking if they don't have a Shabbos or a Yontif Kedushas Hazman. They should feel lacking if they don't have the Kedushas Hamakam as well. So that's the Mishnah in Ksubis, that a kol, it goes so far, a kol Owen, that everyone's obligated in the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. That's every Jew's homeland. So much so that if one spouse wants to move to Israel, the other one doesn't, the spouse who does not want to move to Israel is responsible for breaking up the marriage. Who cares who's responsible for breaking up the marriage? If the marriage isn't going to work out, it's not going to work out. A major nafkamina, a major practical difference is the ksuva. Would the husband have to pay the wife the money for the ksuva, for the marriage document, for when you break up the marriage? So, if it's the husband's fault for breaking up the marriage, he has to pay. If it's the wife's fault for breaking up a marriage, the husband doesn't pay a ksuva. That's what the Mishnah is coming to tell me. Doesn't make a difference in either direction. If he wants to go, she wants to go, whoever doesn't want to go, they're responsible for breaking up the marriage. And the husband has to pay ksuva. Rav Zevin quotes an interesting ma'aser from the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov, I think it was Bereshis Pinchas, Rav Zevin writes, and the Baal Shem Tov used to travel around with his Hasidim all the time. And one time he ended up in one of these motels, and there was a chasana going on. And then I guess the next day, when the chasana were leaving, there was birds were chirping, and the Baal Shem Tov said to his Hasidim, you know what the bird is saying? We don't understand bird language. What is the bird saying? So the Baal Shem Tov says, it's quoting a pasuk in Parashas Pinchas, La'ela techelei ka'aretz, that it's talking about that those included in the census 20 and above, so when you go into Eretz Yisrael, after the Sheva Shekivshu, Sheva Shechilka, the 7 years of conquering and then the 7 years of dividing, so you will get a chelek in the Aretz. La'ela techelei, those would be, that's what the pasuk means. But the Baal Shem Tov, so he said, it says Vayera techalei ka'aretz. That's what the birds are chirping to the Chassid and Kala. And none of the Chassidim understood what the Baal Shem Tov was talking about until many years later, after his family was married for a long time, they had many children, grandchildren, etc. The husband decided, you know what, I want to move to Israel. The wife said, are you kidding me? Are you nuts? I ain't going anywhere. The kids, the grandkids, they're all here. And then so the husband left, and he got, I think the case is he divorced his wife. So that's what the pasuk says. That's what the Baal Shem Tov was alluding to. Their drush, Eretz Yisrael was the cause of them getting a divorce because based on this Mishnah. So either way, so that's the Mishnah in Ksubah. So there's a famous Rav Shlomo Kluger. Rav Shlomo Kluger wrote very long tshuvas, and his grandson also Rav Shlomo Kluger. He wrote to our century. The monarch notes. He makes them very. I think Elif L'Shlomo. It's called like 1,000, 1,200 tshuvas that he summarized. So one of the tshuvas, he was asked a similar question, or not similar, but the question about. The case was, again, similar. They were in Europe. People they were married, children, grandkids. The husband said he was an Eino Mutzlach. He wasn't successful in Parnassa. He was always going from one job to another. And someone said, how about, it's a booming economy in Eretz Yisrael. Why don't you move there? And maybe we could set you up. Oh, this is a great idea. And then he tells his wife, you know what, I'm moving to Eretz Yisrael. So she said, I'm not going anywhere. The kids, the grandkids. So the question is, who's responsible for breaking up the marriage? I mean, who's responsible? It's a Mishnah in Ksuvis. Kol Olin, anyone, either whoever doesn't want to go to Eretz Yisrael is responsible. So in this case, it would seem that the wife is responsible, and therefore she won't get a Ksuva. So comes along of Shlomo Kluger and says, no, it's not true. When does the Mishnah say that you're responsible for breaking up the marriage if you don't want to go. That's only if the other spouse is doing it lishma, for the sake of, how you know that's a separate discussion. But when a husband or the wife is doing lishma, they're doing it purely for the sake of living in Eretz Yisrael. Even though parnas is a mitzvah, and an important mitzvah, Rosh Hashanah says if you're not doing lishma for the sake of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, but you're doing it to make a living, so then the Mishnah doesn't apply. The Mishnah is only talking about if a person's moving to Eretz Yisrael, L'Shem Eretz Yisrael. What is it? Where does Rav Shlomo Kluger get that from? Where else do we have a precedent, a source that a mitzvah only applies if it's Lishma? So it's a Gemara in Yevamos and Aflam and Tesam Beis. It's a Machlokas Tanaim regarding the mitzvah of Yibum. We assume Yibum Kodem L'Chalitza. That we assume that it's better to do Yibum, that if someone's wife dies and then the brother is around, so we say it's better to do Yibum than Chalitza. However, Bisman Hazeh, we don't do Yibum today. So Abba Shul, and we seem to pass in this way, at least the Minhag Ashkenaz, that everyone passes Eishes Ach, though normally the wife of your brother is Asr, it's an Isra Kares. However, the Torah said, B'makam Yibam, it's permissible. So Abba Shul says, why don't we do Yibam today? He says because the only heter of Yibam is, since it would ordinarily involve an Isra Kares of Eishes Ach, so therefore Abba Shul says you only can do it if it's done with Shema. But who knows, maybe he's marrying the woman for her good looks, for her money, for her yichus, or any other reason you want to come up with. So therefore, since we don't know that he's doing Yibam with Shema, so therefore we're concerned he's doing Shalom Shema, and therefore since if not for the mitzvah of Yibam, it would involve the serious Isser, so Abba Shul says we only permit you to do Yibam if we know it's Lishma. Since today we can't know if it's Lishma, so therefore we don't do Yibam today. So based on Abba Shul, Rav Shlomo Kluger says similarly, really, there's a Vayera to divorce your wife. The Gemara tells us, Mizbeach morid mos, the Mizbeach cries, obviously all things being equal. If there are many, the Gemara also says it's Shalom Bayis to divorce your wife. So it depends on, obviously, the scenario, the relationship, and many and hundreds of other things. But all things being equal, and assuming it's not something that halacha recognizes as a good reason, as a valid reason for divorce, to really, it's usher to divorce someone. You committed to take care of the person, etc. However, the Mishnah says, however, it's not makam any mitzvah, it's specifically makam yishuv eretz Yisrael, because that's considered every Jew's homeland, and therefore you can be kofin. You can't kofin her to that force you that your husband wants to learn in a kola. I Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. It might be true, but it has nothing to do with the halacha here. You have to live a normal life, and the assumption is a normal life is everyone to live in their homeland, and every Jew's homeland is Eretz Yisrael. So ordinarily, it's also to divorce your wife for no reason, not a good reason. However, the Mishnah says, for Makam Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, or whatever the reason the Mishnah is, but you can be kofin when you're going to Eretz Yisrael. So Rav Shlomo Kluger says, since this involves an Vayera, if you didn't do it properly, so therefore you have to be doing it Lishma. So someone who is moving to Eretz Yisrael for parnasa reasons, for business reasons, that would not qualify in the head of the Mishnah. Therefore, Shlomo Kluger paskin that the wife does get the ksuva. The husband could divorce her if he wants, but he'll have to pay the ksuva. And that's an interesting thing. That's what we find in many. That's why that's the whole discussion. Rav Chaim Ozer, Grzinski, and others on whether first that din of Abba Shul is that a din d'Rabbanan, a din d'Oraisa. Whether we say whether it's hutra, there's a concept of dechuya and hutra. So whether we say b'makam yibon a tutra, there is no iser. It's only a din drabanan of Abba Shul. As opposed to by get, there'd be techuya, really there's no heter to divorce your wife for no reason, and if it's dealing with techuya, so then you need lishma. That's why we find, as different Achronim point out, that we don't really have the concept of aseh docha lo saseh. We do have it in principle, but kamat, all the cases brought down in the Gemara of aseh docha lo saseh doesn't apply bisman hazeh. And that's what some Mefarshim point out, because we're not on that level anymore. It's kind of like Vayera lishma, that you have to, if you're doing an aseh docha lo saseh, if you're doing a mitzvah b'tzuras Vayera, then you gotta be sure it's lishma, and we're not on that level anymore, and therefore we don't do it anymore. Like Rav Tzadok writes, even though there might be a mitzvah to be the shliach basin to give the makas, you shouldn't be the one volunteering, especially if it's someone you don't like, because who's to say the only heter giving makas if you're doing it for the mitzvah? Like the Chafetz Chaim writes regarding lashon hara with toeles, that in general there's a biblical prohibition of lashon hara, but for constructive purposes it's mutter. However, the Chafetz Chaim others point out, but if you're saying lashon hara about someone you don't like, so then maybe you can't say it, because even though it might be for toeles, your kavana, you're not doing it lishma, you're doing it because you don't like the other person. So that's the yisod here, that the Rav Shlomo Kluger takes from Abba Shul by Yavamas, that since we don't do Yibam today because you need Lishma, since it involves the Isser Eishazach Kares, so too here, divorcing a wife is also a serious Avera, and therefore, for the heter of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael to apply, in order not to pay the ksuva, you have to be moving to Eretz Yisrael, L'Shem Eretz Yisrael, and not because of other reasons, i.e. Parnasa.